Let me tell you about one of the most chilling, almost unbelievable stories from the dawn of the atomic age. It's a story about a brilliant scientist, a sphere of pure plutonium, and a simple, everyday screwdriver that brought them together in a nuclear disaster.
I mean, it sounds crazy, right? Could a tool you've probably got rattling around in a drawer right now really be the trigger for a fatal nuclear accident? Well, the answer is a terrifying yes. And the story of how it all went down is a powerful lesson on the razor-thin line between genius and recklessness.
So, before this chunk of plutonium earned its infamous nickname, the Demon Core, the scientists at Los Alamos actually had a much more, well, normal name for it. They just called it Rufus. So what exactly was this thing, and what made it so incredibly dangerous?
Okay, to really get what happened here, you have to understand one key idea: criticality. The easiest way to think about it is this. Imagine the core is like a pile of perfectly dry firewood. It's ready to burst into flames, but it won't light on its own. That's subcritical. The whole point of these experiments was to surround it with special bricks that acted like mirrors for neutrons, bouncing them back into the core. The goal was to get that pile of wood right to the very edge of catching fire, the point of a self-sustaining chain reaction, without actually letting it go off.
So this plutonium sphere, about the size of a softball, was literally the heart of what would have been the third atomic bomb dropped in World War II. But after Japan surrendered, the bomb wasn't needed. So Rufus stayed behind at the Los Alamos lab to be used in these incredibly risky criticality tests. It went from being a weapon of war to a tool for science.
And you know, the core didn't waste any time proving just how deadly it could be. Its journey to becoming the Demon Core started with its very first victim and a single tragic mistake.
Picture this. It's August 21st, 1945. Physicist Harry Daghlian is working late at night, and he's working alone, which, by the way, was totally against the rules. He's carefully stacking these neutron-reflecting bricks around the core, getting closer and closer to that critical point. And then his hand slips. He drops the last brick right onto the assembly. Instantly, the core went supercritical, and the room was filled with this eerie, silent blue glow.
Daghlian, reacting on pure instinct, knocked the brick away immediately, but it was too late. The damage was done. In just that split second, he had soaked up a fatal dose of radiation. He died a truly horrific death over the next 25 days. From that day on, everyone at Los Alamos knew Rufus wasn't just a piece of metal anymore. It was a killer.
Now you would think a tragedy like that would make them slam on the brakes, right? Reevaluate all their safety procedures. But it didn't. You have to remember the vibe at Los Alamos back then. These were the guys who had just won the war by taming the atom. They felt, in a way, invincible. And walking right into this environment was another brilliant physicist, Louis Slotin, a guy famous for his daring, hands-on approach to an experiment they called tickling the dragon's tail.
And this slide right here, wow, it really tells you everything you need to know. The official, safe protocol was to use these little metal spacers, called shims, to keep the two halves of a reflector separated. But Slotin, he thought that was too slow, too clumsy. His method? He'd hold the top half of the reflector with one hand and just use the blade of a plain old flathead screwdriver to keep that tiny, critical gap open. He was literally holding a nuclear reaction at bay with a hand tool.
On May 21st, 1946, he was showing this exact technique to 7 other scientists in the room. It was a procedure he'd done dozens of times before. But on that day, the screwdriver slipped.
In that instant, the gap vanished. The top dome of the reflector dropped, and the core was completely enclosed. The dragon wasn't just being tickled anymore. It was wide awake.
And just like in the first accident, a brilliant, terrible flash of blue light erupted from the core. It was so intense it ionized the very air in the room. The core had gone prompt critical, an out-of-control, instantaneous chain reaction. Slotin was standing right over the assembly. He later said he felt a wave of intense heat wash over him and got a sour, metallic taste in his mouth. He knew, in that very moment, exactly what had just happened.
And with incredible reflexes, Slotin used his body to flip the top half of that sphere onto the floor, stopping the reaction. He almost certainly saved the lives of every other person in that room. But as for himself, he knew his fate was sealed. He calmly turned to his colleagues and said, "Well, that does it."
The dose of radiation he absorbed in that fraction of a second was just astronomical. 21,000 rems. It's a number so large, it's almost meaningless on its own.
So to try and put that into perspective, take a look at this. This first bar represents what's considered a lethal dose of radiation, about 500 rems, a dose that would kill about half the people who received it. And that second towering bar, that's the 21,000 rems Louis Slotin received. It wasn't just lethal, it was over 40 times a fatal dose. It was a level of exposure scientists had literally never seen a human being endure before.
The end came fast, and it was brutal. He began vomiting almost immediately. The radiation sickness that followed was just horrific. For 9 days, his body waged a war against itself, suffering from massive internal injuries as his bodily functions just completely broke down. On May 30th, 1946, just 9 days after the screwdriver slipped, Louis Slotin was dead.
2 deaths in less than a year from the same object. The screwdriver incident was the final, brutal straw. It marked the absolute end of an era of what people called Cowboy Science, where the personal guts and bravado of the scientists were almost seen as part of the job. Slotin's death was a terrifying wake-up call that the forces they were playing with couldn't be tamed by a steady hand or gut instinct alone.
And this illustrates the change perfectly. Before Slotin's death, you had the world's most brilliant minds physically touching the components of nuclear bombs. After his death, all hands-on criticality experiments were banned, period. This wasn't just a new rule in a manual, it was a profound, fundamental shift in the culture. From then on, these tests were only to be done with remote-controlled machines, with scientists watching safely from a distance.
And as for the core itself, now forever known as the Demon Core, it was eventually melted down. Its plutonium was recycled into other parts of the nuclear program, so its physical form is gone, but its legacy became one of the most important cautionary tales in the history of science. Its story is now a foundational lesson in scientific safety, a permanent reminder that brilliance is no substitute for caution.
Which leaves us with this final, heavy question. Louis Slotin was undeniably brave. His quick actions saved the lives of 7 other people. But his methods, the very reason the accident happened, were born from a confidence that bordered on pride. So as we continue to push the boundaries of knowledge today, the story of the Demon Core forces us to ask, where do we draw that critical line between bold exploration and deadly pride?